The Nation State, an essay by Anthony C. Pick. Dedication. This essay is dedicated to the memory of Irene Pick, 1939 to 2007. Acknowledgements. The author acknowledges with gratitude the help that he has received from Simon Pick and Matthew Pick, without which many errors and omissions would have occurred. Summary. A state is a territorial political community for which there is an independent organized government. A nation-state is a state whose primary loyalty is to a cultural self-identity, which we call a nation or nationality, and is now the predominant form of state organization. Nation-states possess sovereignty and legitimacy. The significance of the nation-state is that, once consolidated around a particular nationality, it is a stable form of state organization. It is the sole form in which the growth of democracy is possible and which does not have a tendency to expand its territory. This stable environment proved to be essential for the emergence of modern financial, industrial and technological civilization in Western Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. The only historic competitors were Imperial China, which was technologically highly innovative but did not become an industrial society until modern times, and the early Islamic Caliphate, which was also technologically and culturally innovative but was conquered by military and tribal states and then declined. Until nation-states appeared in the 16th and 17th century, government was by rulers whose authority did not derive from the people whom they ruled, who were termed their subjects. States ruled in that way had 7 different forms: personal rule, theocracy, city-state, oligarchy, military state, tribal state, and empire. The principal function of such a ruler was to achieve peace and order, by judging disputes and enacting laws by which disputes could be avoided. This could only be performed if his, rarely, her, authority did not derive from his subjects, and to reinforce that authority the concept of legitimacy arose, which defined a right to rule independently of any constitutional system. Legitimacy had to be certain in order to be effective, and a disputed legitimacy was undesirable and might give rise to civil war. Personal rule was the usual first form of state organization, almost always realized by a hereditary dynasty. It was generally supported by a religious sanction, historically the normal source of morality. Theocracies arose when religious authority became stronger than personal rule, although the two might be combined. City-states arose in Europe, also when personal rule was weak, in order to exploit the added value obtainable by trade. Before the added value from trade and industry was available to states, the only form of wealth was the surplus obtainable from agriculture. Personal states therefore had an inherent tendency to seek to extend their territories, by conquest, inheritance, or other means, and in this way territorial empires arose. In some states, the army gained control of its own recruitment and promotion and set up an independent military caste, which we call military rule. In some states with a pastoral hinterland, pastoral tribes established a form of tribal government, also generally supported by a religious sanction. Although the core of most territorial empires were personal states, they have also been theocracies, city-states, military states, and tribal states. All such pre-national forms of government were inconsistent with constitutional rule. The establishment of a nation-state entailed the transfer of legitimacy from a ruler not accountable to those he ruled to one accountable to the nation. This arose as the development of wealth from improved agriculture, trade, and industry created a civil society. The civil society sought a communal identity, through language, religion, common social organizations, and shared experiences and interests, and thus became a nation. We can identify 3 phases in the development of each nation-state. Phase I was the development of a nationality within a clearly defined pre-national state. Phase II was the transfer of legitimacy from the ruler to the nation, by some form of rebellion against the ruler or assertion of nationality. Phase III was the expression of that legitimacy by a legal process called a constitution, under which the government can be appointed and removed, its powers can be debated and approved, and both the government and private litigation are subject to law. Most present states have made the transition to Phase II, and of these an increasing number, perhaps a majority, have made the further transition to Phase 3. Each of these three phases can be identified to a particular datable event in each nation-state. Each phase had to overcome potential obstacles, sometimes painfully. In many countries the realization of each phase requires several attempts, so that it is only in hindsight that we can be sure that a particular phase has been passed. Dynastic failure may prevent formation of a clearly defined national framework. A national identity in one state may imply the exclusion of other identities. National accountability may be resisted not only by rulers but also by interest groups with special privileges which had been negotiated with the ruler. Traditional institutions may fail in their responsibilities to the nation. Civil society may be insufficiently influential to represent the whole nation, so that state institutions are captured by one or more minority elites which contend with each other for supremacy. The same minority elites may then compromise with each other to the exclusion of other interests, or power may be handed over to the military, which sets up a military ruler to perform the functions that personal rule has failed to do. When a state is very weak, a theocratic faction may seek to seize power in the name of its religion, or an imperial faction may pursue the dream of supranational hegemony. However, provided that social and economic development continues, civil society eventually becomes strong enough to establish a stable and effective constitution, and eventually to extend it to the whole population. Nation-states first emerged in the 16th and 17th centuries in the countries on the western edge of Europe, apparently for four reasons. First, the Holy Roman Empire was too weak to interfere with the states to the west of it, but strong enough to protect them from states to the east of it. Secondly, West European states, otherwise dependent on low-productivity agriculture, benefited from the wealth of city-states on the edges of the Holy Roman Empire which were engaged in long-distance trade. Thirdly, the long-lived ruling dynasties of these states provided sufficiently stable and effective government. Fourthly, the same states themselves undertook long-distance trading endeavors. These conditions did not prevail with states in Central, South, and East Asia, even though they developed many advanced technologies. This may have been because the agriculture of Asian states was more productive, so that city-states did not have an opportunity to develop, or because conflicts between the Asian empires and personal states inhibited the stable conditions necessary for nation-states to appear, or because some Asian states were afflicted with ephemeral tribal and military dynasties. When nation-states arose they increased their national wealth by engaging in more widespread trade, and had a natural desire to acquire trading outposts. In this way, trading or colonial empires arose, which competed with each other as new trading opportunities appeared. There were therefore two sorts of empire, territorial and trading. From the point of view of the subject peoples, trading empires were also not constitutional although the core state might be. Although at the start of the 20th century the world's richest states were nation-states, they were few in number and the majority of the world's population were subject to empires, either territorial or trading, all of which have now been divided into states of which the great majority are nation-states. Since the purpose of nation-states is to enable each nation to increase its wealth, the incentive for pre-national states to extend into the territory of other states ceased when they became nation-states. Wealth now comes from trade between states and is diminished by competition between them. The wars of the 20th century were not wars between nation-states but wars between empires and between empires and nation-states. The US and China made the transition from an empire to a nation-state which encompassed their component peoples. Some of the last of the historic states to achieve nationality were the centers of large territorial empires, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, Russia, and Iran, for which the loss of empire released their national self-identity. Three empires in particular have caused problems during the last century. Germany and Japan, having become nation-states, failed to make the transition to constitutional rule and became subject to military regimes which diverted the national effort in order to seize a local empire. A constitutional state had to be forced on them. Russia extended its previous empire under the guise of an anti-constitutional ideology, until finally its system collapsed. In this century, an extreme Islamic group is attempting to establish a theocratic empire in defiance of nationality. States arising from territorial empires generally did so by means of a national revolt, and so came into being with a sense of national identity, although often unclear borders. The same is true of many Asian and North African states which had been subject to a trading empire. States arising from trading empires in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America were often the creations of the imperial power, and so had to construct a national identity within their borders, often from disparate social, tribal, or religious components. In the absence of a legitimate national government, they generally experienced phases of military, personal, tribal, or oligarchic rule while a national sense developed. In a few states, this process has not yet occurred. When a sufficient national identity existed to support constitutional government, the transition might occur relatively peacefully. Our analysis examines first these ideas in greater depth, then the nature of the various pre-national states, then the three phases of the nation-state. The phases are illustrated by the constitutional developments of individual countries.